Tonight, standoff in Wisconsin. Supporters and opponents of the governor's plan to roll back union bargaining rights square off at the state capitol. I'm Russ Mitchell. Also tonight, Middle East in turmoil. Protesters reoccupy the main square in Bahrain, where violent clashes spread across much of the Arab world. Final offer. The head of the $20 billion BP oil spill fund issues new rules for compensation, but not everyone is pleased. And suffering in silence. Victims of sexual abuse in the military file suit against the Pentagon and speak out about the years they lived in fear.
I was so terrified that, I kept a knife under my pillow.
This is the CBS Evening News with Russ Mitchell.
And good evening. We begin tonight with a look at how budget troubles in most of the 50 states are creating havoc for taxpayers and lawmakers. In all, 46 states are projecting budget shortfalls from 2% in Indiana to 45% in Nevada. But tonight, Wisconsin, with an expected shortfall of almost 13%, remains in the spotlight, locked in a battle over budgets, politics, and labor. Cynthia Bowers joins us from the state capital of Madison, Wisconsin, with the very latest. Cynthia, good evening.
Good evening, Russ. Raucous crowds today swelled to an estimated 30 to 40,000 as for the first time pro-union protesters were joined by conservative activists who say they recognize they are in the minority out here, but say they have the majority where it counts, and that's with lawmakers.
Today, union supporters vied for space with conservative activists who say it's time their message is heard.
I know the majority is ready for these cuts. They're ready for things to change.
They were here to show support for the new Republican governor.
Scott Walker was elected due to a job, and now that he's doing it, so people are having like a little temper tantrum.
Scott Walker's first job, he says, is to fill a $136 million budget shortfall for this fiscal year. To help do that, he wants nearly 300,000 Wisconsin public workers to contribute more to their pensions and health insurance.
This is what democracy looks like.
But what is fueling these fiery protests is the provision that would take away public sector unions' right to collective bargaining. Second grade teacher Mary Beth Wentz says the governor's plan is union busting disguised as budget balancing.
We're sending a really strong message that unions are here for a purpose.
Although Wentz taught this week, so many other teachers called in sick, dozens of school districts had to cancel class. Today, pro-union physicians were busy writing backdated notes to allow those teachers to collect pay, even though they skipped school.
The taxpayers are paying them to work while they're pretending they're sick, and that's okay with you?
It is. It was Wisconsin that gave birth to public worker unions 75 years ago. Now it could be the first to gut their power. Labor leaders fear if this state falls, others will as well. But 14 Democratic lawmakers remain missing after fleeing the state to delay that vote. Today, Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald says no amount of protesting will change the outcome.
The bill is not negotiable. What would be negotiable is what's it going to take to get them back into the chamber.
With the holiday on Monday, the likeliest, earliest date for the legislature to reconvene is on Tuesday, although they say they could vote at any time if any of those Democratic senators show back up. One thing's for sure, though, the crowd isn't going anywhere, Russ.
Cynthia Bowers in Madison, Wisconsin. Thank you very much. On the national level, it was a late night on Capitol Hill, and before it ended after 4 o'clock this morning, the House had defied President Obama and voted to slash more than $60 billion from the federal budget. The move sets the stage for the possibility the government could run out of money. Senior White House correspondent Bill Plant has more.
The bill is passed.
The vote, driven by new Republican House members, strips $61 billion from this year's $1.2 trillion federal budget and sets up a confrontation with the Democrats in the Senate.
We have a mandate from the American people to cut spending.
In 4 long days and nights of debate on more than 150 amendments, House Republicans voted, among other things, to deny the money required to carry out the provisions of the new health care law, to defund or roll back regulations for environmental enforcement, and to stop federal funding for Planned Parenthood, the subject of an emotional exchange. New Jersey Republican Chris Smith, arguing against the funding, quoted from the description of a procedure he called extermination.
And then the little body crumpled and began disappearing into the cannula before my very eyes.
Jackie Spear, a California Democrat, responded with an angry revelation.
I'm one of those women he spoke about just now.
Spear said that she had had the same procedure and not by choice.
I lost a baby. But for you to stand on this floor and to suggest, as you have, that somehow this is a procedure that is either welcomed or done cavalierly or done without any thought is preposterous.
The intensity of the debate on all these issues left tempers short.
This is a travesty of the democratic process.
And to be lectured about what is a travesty is a travesty.
But like it or not, the government runs out of money in 2 weeks. And that means that unless the Senate adopts this budget, of which there's not really a chance, or both houses agree to another short-term extension, which the Speaker says he won't do at the current spending rates, then the government will shut down. So is there a deal to be had? Well, both sides remember what happened the last time there was a government shutdown, and you can expect 2 weeks of playing chicken while both parties assess the possible outcome. Chris? Oh, Russ, I'm sorry.
No problem at all. I've been called much worse. Spilled plant in the White House. Thank you. Next, we head overseas to the Middle East and the unrest sweeping across the Arab world. In Algeria, police in riot gear and armed with clubs broke up a protest by thousands of pro-democracy demonstrators. In Libya, security forces fired on opponents of Muammar Gaddafi's 42-year-long rule, killing at least 15 people. In Yemen, thousands of protesters were fired upon by riot police. At least one person was killed, 5 others injured. In Kuwait, police fired tear gas at roughly 300 stateless Arabs who were demanding citizenship, while in Bahrain, protesters seem to have won a partial reprieve, at least for now. Alan Pizzi is there with the latest.
The day began with a standoff. Riot police on one side of the razor wire, several thousand chanting protesters on the other. Bahrain's leaders had already withdrawn army tanks and troops under pressure from Western leaders following a violent crackdown on Thursday. But the demonstrators weren't impressed. Every police request for them to leave was met with chants of, "We are peaceful." Then, without warning, the riot police beat a hasty retreat. The crowd surged forward. A cheering, placard-waving river of people took back Pearl Square. Even they could hardly believe it.
The victory is about democracy. If we want to be no less than what democratic people in the West, the democracy they enjoy.
There is no indication their demands will be met, but today they were enjoying the moment. For the protesters, this is the victory for which all the blood was shed. Control of Pearl Square gives them a focal point for their demands. But one of those demands is for the removal of the ruling dynasty, and the troops weren't pulled out to let that happen. Even as the square was being reclaimed, riot police fired rubber bullets and tear gas at another group heading for the celebrations. At least 60 people were reported injured. Despite the violence and a number of deaths this week, repression no longer intimidates.
We've been given promises. We've seen our own people die. The Bahraini blood on this floor, we are not going to be quiet.
As night fell, Pearl Square was anything but quiet. Thousands came to celebrate their symbolic victory and press the point that they are prepared to camp out to push their demands for radical change.
Tonight, perhaps taking a page from the protesters who organized themselves on social networking systems, the government's Ministry of Information tonight put out a Twitter message saying that the Crown Prince was engaged in dialogue with opposition members. It's not clear, however, who they are or what form that dialogue is taking. Russ?
Alan, from what you're hearing, what is the government's next move?
They have to talk. And it seems like the Crown Prince is the one that the public will trust if they trust anybody in the royal family. They say they don't trust them. But the Crown Prince does have some credibility. He's in his 40s, and that's the way they're going to have to go. I don't see that they have any other way out of this.
Alan Pizzi joining us via Skype from Bahrain. Thank you. Elsewhere in the region, U.S. officials said Somali pirates have seized a 58-foot yacht in the Arabian Sea believed to have 4 Americans on board. The pirates may be heading back to Somalia, where they could hold the Americans for ransom. Elaine Quijano has the latest.
For more than 6 years, Jean and Scott Adam of California sailed around the world on their yacht, the SV Quest. The couple's website said the yacht was on its way to Oman from India. But according to reports, the Quest was hijacked about 275 miles from Oman's coast. Maritime experts say detecting and avoiding pirates in the region can be impossible.
There's a saying within the industry that every pirate is a fisherman and every fisherman is a pirate. So until they actually commit the act or attempt to commit the act, they have every right to be out there in those waters as anyone else.
Also believed to be on board the Quest, 2 other Americans whose identities have not been released. A military spokesman will only say the military is monitoring the situation.
Ideally, the United States will be able to intercept this yacht, intimidate and harass the pirates enough, make it in their interest to give up the hostages without a gunfight.
The hijacking happened just 2 days after a Somali pirate was sentenced in a federal court in New York to 33 years in prison for the hijacking of the Maersk, Alabama in 2009.
Piracy has become a major industry in Somalia, filling really a vacuum of a state that can't provide economic opportunity, can't provide livelihoods for its people.
Except through criminal enterprise, which puts unsuspecting Americans in danger. Elaine Quijano, CBS News, New York.
And still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, could Watson the computer be your next doctor? But first, victims of the BP oil spill weigh the compensation funds. Final offer. Today, a University of Georgia scientist revealed new underwater pictures, which she believes shows oil from the BP spill is still stuck on the seafloor of the Gulf of Mexico and still destroying life there. Meanwhile, the head of the $20 billion Gulf Claims Fund announced new rules on how final payments will be determined. Mark Strassman in Grand Isle, Louisiana, has more, including an exclusive interview with the fund chief.
All these people are. What do you think, we're all just a bunch of crackers?
For months, Ken Feinberg got an earful. Angry Gulf Coast residents demanding BP pay them for their losses. As the BP fund administrator, Feinberg needed to figure out what was fair for people like Sarah Rago.
This is a lot worse than Katrina.
On Grand Isle, Louisiana, business at Rago's restaurant, Sarah's, has tanked, down 90% since the spill. BP paid her $10,000. She's applied for another $162,000 from the Gulf Claims Fund, or she closes for good.
They don't have no certain date of when we might get another check, or even how much it might be.
Late yesterday, that changed, and nearly 500,000 people with claims now know Feinberg's final formula. With proper documentation, BP will write most of them a check for twice their losses for 2010. Oystermen will get 4 times their losses, except, and they agree not to sue BP. Feinberg thinks it's fair, but told us in an exclusive interview he knows the grumbling is about to get louder.
You do not design and administer these compensation programs expecting anybody to be happy.
BP thinks it's too generous. The oil giant has already paid out $3.4 billion in partial claims and another $12.6 billion for the cleanup, ongoing in places like Bay Jimmy, Louisiana.
Made the best of a bad situation,
BP hired Danny Ray and his boat for the cleanup. He earned more than $250,000, enough to buy himself a new house. The locals call guys like Ray spillionaires.
I did okay.
But the bill killed business for Greg Schlumbrecht, another charter captain. 1 booking for all this year. He's counting on a generous BP check.
This is my sole source of income.
Feinberg says only 17% of all claimants have filed the needed documentation.
The biggest obstacle to actually making the payments is the tremendous lack of substantiation of these claims.
Claims from people with a new decision. Take BP's final offer or hire a lawyer. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Grand Isle, Louisiana.
Winds with gusts up to 60 miles an hour roared through the Northeast today with some disastrous results. In Washington, the winds toppled the national Christmas tree, which was planted on the ellipse near the White House back in 1978. And just ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, victims of sexual abuse in the military take their case to court. By its own reckoning, the Pentagon receives 9 reports of sexual assault in the military every day. This week, its response to these assaults came under fire in court. And that's tonight's Weekend Journal, a lawsuit by a group of victims who aim to hold the Pentagon to account.
Awareness is pain, and that's definitely the case in this situation.
Corey Choka is very aware of the military's problem with sexual assault. She was 20 years old when she volunteered for the Coast Guard.
I was there to serve my country, but I was a target. I was under friendly fire.
Choka says commanders at her Michigan base turned a blind eye to harassment by one superior officer who made constant sexual advances.
I was so terrified that, I kept a knife under my pillow.
Still, she says that officer pulled her into his cabin and raped her in December 2005.
I live in pain every day.
Choka is now the lead plaintiff in a lawsuit filed this week by 16 victims of sexual abuse in the military. They accuse Defense Secretary Robert Gates and his predecessor, Donald Rumsfeld, of failing to prevent and prosecute rapes.
The fact is we aren't where we should be. It is a matter of grave concern, and we will keep working at it.
The Pentagon established a special office to battle sex crimes in its ranks 6 years ago, yet reported attacks keep going up to 3,200 in 2009, while only 983 reports, or 30%, resulted in disciplinary action.
If it happens by the person that's supposed to watch your back when you're in Iraq or Afghanistan, it can be especially disturbing.
Kay Whitley, who heads the Pentagon's program, says the court-martial percentage for sexual assaults is up, but her focus is on prevention.
Bystander intervention calls on each soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine to stand up and prevent sexual assault.
That may be easier said than done. Sarah Alberson, who says a higher-ranking Marine raped her in their barracks in 2006, says the military is plagued by a culture of cover-up.
Nobody wants to say that there's been a rape in their command. Just looks bad on paper.
Advocates for victims say the aftermath can be just as painful as the assaults.
In various different ways, these women were retaliated against from everything from insults and beatings to being thrown out of the military to being locked in their quarters.
Home in Ohio and out of the military, Corey Choka wants the lawsuit to increase accountability and safety.
I hope that things can change in the military. We are very beat, but we are not beaten.
This April, the Pentagon will launch a global hotline to report a sexual assault anywhere in the world. We'll be right back. And finally this evening, as most of America knows by now, a computer named Watson defeated 2 human opponents on Jeopardy this week. So what does Watson do for an encore? As Jim Axelrod tells us, it's already in training for a new line of work as Dr. Watson.
Forget Lady Gaga and her egg. The biggest splash on TV last week.
This is Jeopardy!
Was made by a game show contestant.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ken Jennings and Brad Rutter.
No, not these guys. This guy.
Seems to have a split personality.
Who is Hyde?
Hyde, yes.
Watson. IBM's supercomputer, which took on 2 of Jeopardy's all-time champs and crushed them in a man versus machine matchup, which carried some scary implications.
I, for one, welcome our new computer overlord.
No matter how much we chuckled about them. In the world of artificial intelligence, Watson is a superstar, able to understand language with all its nuances and sift through 200 million pages of content in 3 seconds to figure out complicated Jeopardy clues.
Who is Jean Valjean?
Correct.
It helps us appreciate our brains, our cognition, how we solve problems, and how incredible the human mind and the human body is.
But IBM's engineers and computer scientists didn't develop Watson simply to dominate game shows. Job 1 for Watson may be healthcare. IBM has partnered with 2 hospitals and is now testing Watson to see how the computer would deal with patients.
Watson is answering medical questions as quickly
and with the same level of confidence that it answered a lot of those hard Jeopardy questions.
Dr. Herbert Chase says the information explosion in modern medicine threatens to overload doctors, making them less effective.
Watson can go find information that will directly impact on your understanding of the patient's diagnosis.
One goal is to reduce diagnostic mistakes, which account for 15 to 25% of medical errors, according to some research.
We are never going to replace physicians, for example. The human brain is unassailable.
In other words, while a computer could one day make even Alex obsolete on Jeopardy,
good luck, Watson.
When it comes to healthcare, the thinking is the human doctor will always be in. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, New York.
And that is the CBS Evening News. Thanks for joining us. I'm Russ Mitchell. I'll see you again tomorrow night. Good night.